I perform.
Oh no.
And it's always been, it has, after 25 years of performing, it has always been.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I really have to like just plow through the panic.
Yeah.
And hope that it will slowly get better.
Yeah.
Which it usually does, but it takes a few songs to get there, you know.
Yeah.
So that's kind of difficult, but it's not the end of the world. It's something that I've like learned to manage as often as I can, and just sort of accept that it's gonna affect me sometimes, and I can't prevent that from happening. So I just have to find ways to work with it that suit me. So that's like the best I can kind of offer myself within that scenario. I'm not winning with this microphone at all. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry if mum and dad are watching. I'm sorry. Just making, to be fair, they've heard me swear often enough. But as long as everyone can hear me, I think it's fine.
So are we, Jenny, are we streaming now?
We are indeed.
Okay.
We are streaming.
Oh yeah, I can see the big red thing that says live. Okay.
All right.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I think, although amusingly, I was still streaming on the other one for much longer than I should have been. But this is great. Thank you so much for just like sitting down with me and be willing to like nerd out for a while about all things production. It's kind of one of these things where I for me this is like a bonus, because you and I have worked together on a couple of other bits, and it's always kind of been like, oh yeah, like like cool, let's do the thing, and now we have to go back to our homes.
Yes, I know.
So this is a treat, a true treat. So thanks for indulging me in.
No, it's I'm really glad to be here, and I've been really enjoying listening to the album, so I'm excited to get talking about it and delving in behind the scenes.
Let's do it. Let's delve.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like obviously I'm now going to be steering this bit, so you can relax a bit, Jenny, in a way, because obviously you've just been playing music and performing live, and so yeah, I'll try and kind of take the steering wheel for a little bit for you. But yeah, I just thought it would be nice to start with talking about what do you want this album to mean to people?
That's a really good starting question. Oh, right. Anyone watching, you got to understand, last time we chatted, it was me talking to Isobel and asking Isobel questions. So this is really funny. But so what do I want it to mean to people, really? There's kind of like a twofold answer to that question. From there's kind of the part, because I think it's mostly because of the fact that I am the songwriter and the producer. So I'm always driving two agendas, because there's the reasons that I wanted to make this record as a songwriter, and then there's the reasons I wanted to make this record as a producer, and they are quite different. So as a songwriter, I want this record to be a record that ultimately helps people to access topics that they don't necessarily know how to access. There's such a broad variety in there, and it's all to do with, like, I based every single song on a difficult experience that was almost unintentional, but it's happened. And I think a lot of songwriters generally become songwriters because they struggle to find vocabulary to process and digest the things that have happened to them, so they lean into an art form. A lot of artists are like that, and so I process these experiences through music, and a lot of them were really tough. A lot of them are about mental health. There's mental health, there's domestic violence, there's falling in lust with queer people, and the kind of the variations on romantic kind of stories that we expect, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. There's losing faith in the church and finding it in gay bars. There's all kinds of things. Really. And the thing is, I've discovered over time, the more niche you get, the more universal it gets. It's weird.
Yeah.
Like the more particular, the more you drill down, the more you find people who experience something similar. And so as from a songwriting perspective, that's where that came from. And that's what I want. I want people to be able to see themselves reflected in that record and to find some comfort and some connection from it, but also just have a really good dance. There's a lot of bangers in there that are really upbeat and up tempo. And I love Robin's attitude towards things of like, oh, I'm sad, let's dance about it. That's something that I really want, is for people to find movement and motivation in difficult times. And I think we've all just been through a 2.5 year difficult time. So
yeah,
here's something that might help. Catharsis. So that's the songwriting. And then from the production perspective, in the Pop Not Pop series, which if you find the right link, you can still find on YouTube somewhere. I started making a series when I started making this record, as I was writing it and as I started to produce the foundations of it. And I am someone who is quite Marmite about things. Like, I don't have a lot of middle ground. Stuff is either great or it's not for me. And I recognize that, it's subjective. You can't be everyone's cup of tea, and neither is someone going to be everyone's cup of tea. But there's a lot of pop music that I find really boring and samey, and I wanted to explore sound dynamics and sound design and put that in a pop music space, and really expand and expound on that sonically, and really start to stretch and grow my production and my technical expertise, because I was realizing over time, as I was developing the record, that my production levels were actually my kind of intuition within production space was very sharp, and was receiving a lot of attention when I started to kind of put this album idea in front of people and apply for different things and use that as a project for applying for funding and things like that. So I think there was something there that resonates with people, with this idea of, this doesn't sound like anything else. And it can be troublesome from a marketing perspective. But because everyone expects pop music to sound a particular way. And particularly things like pitching to sync, they'll give you a reference song that they want your song to sound like. And my music doesn't really sound like anything.
Well, however, it's not totally out there, no. Like, let's let's be realistic. I can hear inflections of Robin in it for sure. Like, I can hear some of those influences. So maybe you could kind of tell us who are the artists that have influenced your sound?
Yeah, actually I can. And what I'll do is I'll drop into the chat a big sexy playlist that I made.
Cool. That's great.
Of everything. But I can rattle a lot of them off the top of my head, because obviously I've been listening to people quite a lot consecutively. This record took 2 years to make.
Well, that was going to be one of my other questions, was what was it like making it? But first, let's talk about the people that have influenced the sound that you've been developing.
Oh man, thank you, Isobel, for being here, because you're going to keep my tangents in check. You are. Right, I'm just gonna find it. Right, yes, okay. So you've got a couple of hours worth of songs here. But I listened, there was a lot of rock pop. So I was listening to Billie Eilish was really starting to hit the crest of the wave in 2020.
That is a massive bottle, Jenny, by the way.
I know, it's
like, is that a bottle of wine? No. She's not just chugging it from the bottle.
It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, but not today.
Your studio, your choice. So.
That's true.
Those are the rules. So.
That is accurate. Yeah, fair. So yes. So wine aside, no, it's elderflower and apple.
Okay, that sounds much more wholesome.
Very, very civilized. So I was listening to Billie Eilish. I was listening to a band called Paris, who are very rock and dance influenced together, but with an R&B undertone, which is fascinating. I was listening to a lot of Grimes, who also incorporates rock and dance influence. Lady Gaga does the same. I was listening to kind of some more kind of what's the word, some more fringe kind of acts, like Kimbra, who has had mainstream success but kind of continues to churn out her own stuff that's always a little bit edgy. I was looking at Kate Bush. There was a lot of there were some very particular things that I was hanging my hat on, like the song Pervertaire, track number 2, was very influenced by Block Party. And Paint was very influenced by Kiss by Prince.
That
Sweat,
makes sense. Yeah.
Sweat, which was the first track, was very influenced by Jessie Ware. Because I was listening to Watch Your Pleasure on loop for about 9 months. It was just ticking all the boxes for me. But there it's such a blend of like classic and contemporary, really. Like there's some Diana Ross in there, there's M83 in there, there's Janelle Monáe in there, there's the 1975 Churches as well, was a very big influence on the record. But also I think because my background before I started making pop was folk music, but before that there was rock music, and I was listening to a lot of indie rock bands in my university years. So I was listening to a lot of artists like Delphic and Phoenix, and there's lots of Layers and Stax and Arcade Fire as well. I was listening to all those bands, and those bands produced such brilliantly commercial but also at times quite deeply kind of like edgy and experimental and fringe kind of sounds woven in, and I loved it. And so that all then kind of got all rolled together. But also there's a lot of, I'm very invested in my sense of songcraft. Like a song has to be able to stand alone outside of its production for me in order to be good. So there are some artists that I have a great deal of passion for, like the kind of, unfortunately now kind of no longer operational Frightened Rabbit were my favorite band for a long time, and the songcraft of the late Scott Hutchison is to me, there is no better writer in the 20th/21st century in terms of contemporary indie rock. But at the heart of those songs, all those songs are folk music, like they're folk melodies. When you strip all the rock out of them, it's all very lilting, Celtic inflected melody. So I have a lot of love, and Scott's writing definitely impacted a lot of the album, particularly Consent. Like I really needed that song, and I wrote it at a time I really needed it. And there's a song that Scott wrote called Nothing Like You, which is in the Spotify playlist, and it's just chef's kiss great.
Okay, well that's great. I mean, and obviously when you post the link to the playlist, people can go and listen to all that stuff. But maybe we could talk a little bit about the process then of making the album. You said it took a long time, so let's start with that. How long did it take? And then maybe you could tell us, how did it unfold? Like, did you write all the songs first and then you got into production, or were you writing as you were producing? But first, how long did it take?
Okay, if I'm being granular about this album started being written in 2017.
Wow. Okay.
So Ready was written in 2017. I think Ready was probably the first one actually to be written for the album. From I need to pull up my own playlist, because there we go. It was Ready I think was first, and then a bit later I wrote Pervertaire and Bad Code. They were actually in my live repertoire all the way through the Liminal campaign, which was my second EP. I was taking those songs into those gigs to promote on campaign, to promote that record, because I just needed to fill out everything. I need to fill out a headliner slot. So I was experimenting with new songs, and those three kind of made it into the live shows. Pervertaire as well, that was produced in terms of the foundational elements incredibly quickly. I was noodling around with iOS devices, which I still do now, as you can see in the live stream today. But I pulled together loops and stuff for that and threw it into GarageBand. This was even before I graduated to Logic, which only really happened in 2018. And ditto for Bad Code. Bad Code was very heavily influenced by Kimbra's Top of the World. And that in turn was influenced by Kanye West. So there's like this lovely drip effect going on, really. But I knew that after Liminal, I was ready to write a full length record. I knew the songs were evolving, and then I wrote Post Breakup Blues in 2018 when I did have a big breakup. Oh, no stereotypes there at all. And then, but the interesting thing was all the singles were later songs. They all came together in 2020 or 2019, 2020. So that was Sweat, Paint and Consent all came together just before the pandemic. Sweat was, I think, the last song to be written for the record, and that was in August, I think, of 2020. So that was what I call high lockdown. And so it was a drip feed. But the thing was that in the January of 2020, I made that was when I made the YouTube POPNOTPOP series. That was when I was like, right, this is a project. I am going to make the album. I'm going to make it on the internet so that everyone can see how I do it. Because one of my biggest issues in the past has been to do with gatekeeping with knowledge, both in music and audio industry. And it pisses me off no end. So I end up on this kind of big crusade to basically help people to access and to generate ideas using stuff that might scare them a bit, but they can't, be like this, it doesn't have to be scary. This is how you access. And that's what I've actually been hired a lot of the time to do for music technology companies, is to work with them on their content to help people to access their products. So it all kind of rolled together. But also by the time I hit January 2020, I had been working for Rolly, whose products I use a lot. I use copiously, really. And I'd been consultant for them for over a year. And so I had access to so much good software and hardware, which I still do. They're very gracious. They still let me use all the stuff, and I don't work for them anymore. And they're just lovely. So it was almost like there was a very slow burn up until January of 2020. And then there was a massive acceleration all the way through until kind of autumn of 2020. And that was partly because I was just locked in a room, wasn't I? I was living in a flat share where there was no communal space except the kitchen and the bathroom. And I was lucky because I had a big room, but it was the only room I had. And you know what, when you have very little to do except watch Netflix, then you get inventive with what you've got. Okay,
so that's interesting. It sounds like there was stuff kind of brimming away, and you were writing songs, and you were kind of new music was coming, but it wasn't until 2020 and really lockdown where it just became this project that had a whole kind of concept behind it, of it being pop not pop.
Yes.
And you feeling like, well, I really want to make this exposing, like pulling back the curtain on the process. So how did that then develop into the finished album that we have today? What's your process that you go through of recording and production? And do you find that, like I was asking before, do you write everything first and then it's just a case of bringing that into the studio / your DAW? Or is it that you have a beat and you start working with a beat and then the song comes? How do you write? Is writing and producing the same thing to you?
I mean, realistically, the answer is yes. Now, it has evolved.
Yeah.
It used to be I wrote a song and then I took it into the DAW.
Yeah.
But becoming better acquainted with technology has completely changed that for me. Because again, being a neurospicy person, I like to
Did you just say neurospicy?
Neurospicy.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard that.
I stole it from TikTok. Yeah.
That's
So
great.
because I have ADHD, I crave novelty. So for me, I will approach a song however my brain chemistry tells me I'm inclined to approach it. So sometimes that's I sit down and I write it from top to bottom on the acoustic guitar. That happened with Consent. Sometimes on the electric, that happened with Ready. And sometimes I will get into a chorus and get stuck and hand it over to somebody else. That happened with Tiptoe. Thank God bless Ostel, she's amazing. And sometimes it will be so for Sweat, I just had this concept and some lyrics, and actually lyrics is usually where it begins regardless.
Right. Okay.
So I have what I call the lyric pool. I add to the lyric pool every day.
Okay.
And so you can imagine how big it is now. And some of those ideas aren't very good, and that's why you don't ever hear them.
Yeah.
But I write daily. And it has been that way for many years, that I just churn it out. And sometimes it's just a line, sometimes it's like a bunch of lines, sometimes it's a verse and a chorus. So for Sweat, I just had a concept and I sat down and I made the bass line. And that bass line was so banging that I was like, well, I think we all know this is going to be disco, and I think we all know that it's going to be about the church. So this is so that evolved in a particular direction. With Paint, I was making loops in this app, this Rolly app. It basically just like using the kind of, this is a synthesizer by the way, like this is the equivalent of like a keyboard. And it's and you can then kind of grid notes to it and put it in a particular mode, and it will become, you know, the equivalent of your sample launcher, like this one behind me. And so yeah, so Paint was developed with just 4 instruments and a bunch of loops. Catch the Light was developed that way as well. I actually took Catch the Light into a queer cabaret to test it out as a part of like a 15-minute comedy set that I did. It was very weird. Wow. It went well, but yeah, it was just like testing out the concept and at that time all I had was this, and I was playing it in my hand while I was singing. Which was really cool because that was again introducing people to like not just a kind of a way of making music, but a presentation of that music that they'd never experienced before. So that was, so the answer is like, it could happen anyway. It's literally just to do with my brain will be like, this is today's tool, or this is today's tool, or this is today's tool, and I just roll. I follow the dopamine.
Yeah, but it sounds like that the studio's now become your kind of your like sketchbook, as it were, hasn't it? Whereas before, like you're saying, it was more kind of I'll write a whole song and then I'll record it. But now, because you feel more confident, but also you've probably just got a lot more tools at your fingertips.
Yes,
you're using the studio more like a sketchbook, and also then, you know, writing as you go. So one thing I was going to ask is, how much of the album is MIDI instruments, how much of it is samples, how much of it has been recorded as live instruments? What's the kind of balance there, or does it vary a lot from track to track?
No, it's actually quite particular. So the ratios are quite what's the word, consistent, really. It's probably about 20 to 30% live. So a lot of the guitars that you'll hear that are the first guitars, that's me playing the guitar. I play live bass on Consent and a few other a couple of other things. Obviously I do all the vocals, all with the exception of Tiptoe, all the vocals are mine. I often will pitch shift and formant shift my voice to shape it, make it sound different. And especially if I'm stacking vocals and I want some variation, sometimes I manipulate my voice to make it sound like a man. And I did that on Catch the Light, the kind of the vocals that you hear in the background, that are the kind of the slightly like the crowd, the small choir vocals towards the end, that it sounds like there are some men in there. There aren't, they're me. So that's probably about 30% of it. And obviously I do tons of vocal stacks because I love them. I absolutely love them. And then probably everything else is MIDI, is hardcore programming and samples. Like samples maybe about 10%, because I will sometimes sample my own voice, or I will I will kind of generate a sample using a MIDI instrument, but I will fuck with it and kind of manipulate it, throw filters, amps, all kinds of stuff on it, and then whack it through either something really simple like a Q sampler in Logic is very straightforward for that, or or just kind of just do it almost old school, like cutting and pasting. And because sometimes I don't have the time to find the delay I want, so sometimes I'll literally just cut and paste and move things around so that it hits where I want it to, as opposed to trying to constantly noodle around with parameters to make that delay sit exactly where I want it to. Like I'm very much about speed and efficiency and finding the fastest way to do something, rather than sometimes taking the time to learn how something really works. Like I need to do this now. So so if I don't have time, then I will find a fast way to do it.
And is it are you playing everything, or are there some instruments that you've had other people record? Or
so there are two tracks that other people appear on. Annie sang and played her beautiful Nord for Tiptoe, and then I got a artist producer whose name is Mima, that's her professional brand, who is a remarkable Portuguese artist and producer, who actually I have so much love for her stuff, because it's also very dark. It's very dark Portuguese rock pop, and it's nice because she's been kind of getting some recognition these days. She actually she auditioned for Eurovision in Portugal, so it was really fun watching her on the telly.
Oh wow.
I know. I was like, I had her on the projector, I was like, look, it's you. And so she did additional production on Perverter, because I got to a point where I had developed it really well and it was big but not big enough. Like I was like, I've hit a ceiling of big production wise, and I just felt like she was the right person to get involved. And so I dinged this over to her and I said, look, you've got really good dark production vibes. Do you want to put some guitar or samples, or do you want to just have a play with this and see what comes out for you to elevate it at these points in the track? And so that's exactly what she did. She sent over about 12 to 15 stems, and some of them were just takes of her shredding. Oh my god. So good. It's so good. Like I can play guitar a decent amount. I've been playing guitar a long time, but I can't shred, like not my skill. And just listening to the stuff that she came up with it really did just take it from like church to cathedral. And I was just delighted. So she didn't do any vocal on it, but she created some kind of like ear candy samples as well, and created a sub for it, which I was only able to use some of because it was so big. It was so big, it was so subby that it was just like the width of it just took up the whole track. So I was like, oh, this is great, but I can't, the texture's amazing, but no one's going to be able to hear this properly through like AirPods. So I had to do a little bit of modification on it, and then I put what I could onto it. And and some stuff also she kicked out, and she put samples in certain places, and I was like, I don't like it there, but I think if I move it over here, it's gonna really sparkle, and that worked really well. And I sent her the track back and she really liked it, so that was a win. But everything else is me.
So, and if I was going to ask you, is there one sort of production technique, or if there's one moment in the album that you're most proud of, what would it be? as a producer?
Oh, so hard. So hard. There are so many things. Okay. I think it's quite tricky because you're not supposed to have favorites, but you inevitably do.
I mean, because another way of putting it is, right, that as the person that produced it,
Yeah.
whenever you listen to that bit, you're like, you always enjoy listening to it because
Yeah.
you know it just hits a something. You've managed to
Yeah.
achieve something with it.
Yeah. Actually, no, I'm gonna big up one of my consultants for this record. So I did have people put their ears on this record at different points.
Mm-hmm.
But there is one point. So Consent is my favorite song on the record, and that might change, but for now it is. And there's this one bit that I was able to get Ruby Smith, who is a remarkable mix engineer who's based out of Berlin. She works a lot with Sony at the moment. And she works on actually she's just working on some Amima stuff, which is brilliant. And I've kind of helped to shepherd them all together. But she and I had sat down and had a lovely Zoom call at one point because I was really struggling with getting my vocal production up to a commercial level. And actually I saw you just did a video about this on Instagram, and it was very good. I was like, oh yeah, that's a good tip. It's a nice one.
Yeah.
But she sat down and she gave me basically she gave me a cheat sheet of the ways in which, because originally I said, can I hire you to do some vocal production on the record? And she said, I really don't have the time, but I can give you the cheat sheet. And I said, okay. So
that's great.
we sat down and she gave me like a list of techniques and plugins, maybe like 5. It wasn't loads, but she said, you're almost there and I can hear it in the track. But if you try these, it'll probably elevate things a bit more, especially in terms of the lead vocal and the prominent backing vocals, because there were times when I really just wanted the vocals to cut in and to be so tight and so shiny, because it's rock pop and you want it to kind of cut through the noise. And so I took those kind of plugins. There was a couple that I just off the top of my head, the vocal rider you recommended. I think it might have been Waves. Their freebie, their vocal rider is excellent. And I use Smooth Ride preset on it. And also she said have a play with the Isotopes free doubler. And that was fucking great actually. And it's really fun and interesting to play around with the different settings on that. And I did so, and she kind of led me through some techniques around parallel compression and parallel reverb. And so I started applying those. And so now when I listen back to the second chorus of Consent and those backing vocals kick in on the line, I laced a little hope in, I left a little light on. It's just the perfect impact, and it's just so satisfying because they're so shiny and tight and punchy. And they kind of contrast the big reverby gang vocals at the end. And to have that lovely, anything that's got like a really fresh, really kind of dynamic balance throughout the song that keeps your brain kind of ticking over. Again, this is more just ADHD really, and just like having the attention span this big.
No, I don't think it is. I think that it's a really important thing that people often don't spend enough time learning, is how do you produce in a way that keeps people's, it's not about even keeping people's attention, it's about surprising people. It's about people not just kind of knowing they can predict the rest of the song, because then that's not interesting. You know, if you know what's going to happen for the rest of the film, you're probably going to switch it off, for example. So
or you just start playing on your phone.
I think it's a really important thing to consider, and people often don't in production, you know.
But actually there's one other section that I would mention. This is like maybe the second favorite bit. They're in Versailles, which is the penultimate track on the album. There is a strings section that I programmed using this. And I love this. This is MPE technology. So it's MIDI polyphonic expression. And it's to do with the fact that basically what you've got is a squishy surface that allows you to mess around with not just an X and Y kind of axis, which is to do with things like velocity, aftertouch, and kind of pitch bend, which is this way, but it also like allows for things like vibrato and depth and things like that. And a lot of the presets that Rolly generate are kind of you're able to program basically a lot of stuff you do by automation afterwards.
Okay.
So it cuts a lot of time off of your producing. Like you can tidy up the data as well afterwards through the step editor in Logic anyway. But I programmed this string section with SWAM strings, and a mixture of that and some of the GarageBand iOS strings, which are remarkable. I've used them in every record I've ever made. They're so great. I can't believe they're free. And they have a sense, and because it's touch sensitivity, the articulation that you're able to achieve is quite remarkable. So yeah, so that's that string section. It's the middle eight that has the like that's probably got about 5 layers of strings in. So there's like an orchestral string section, then there's the double bass, there's the cellos, and there's the violins and the violas, and I've got them all doing different things at different times as well. And the kind of the cello solo towards the end of that middle eight, which picks out the vocal melody. And I would literally just mute everything else and just listen to that section over and over and over. I'd just be like, it's so good.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, like, would you ever release alternative versions of the tracks, where you do strip back, or because like obviously people do like acoustic versions, but of course you could do stripped back, slightly reworked versions, couldn't you?
I have thought about it. It's possible. I mean, it's one of these things where if I had I'm making more music for other people now, so it's sort of like, and that's fine, that's absolutely something I'm doing on purpose. So if I had time and some funds to do it, I might. I actually did create an acoustic EP for my Patreon community a couple of years ago that had some early versions of some of these songs. So I have kind of dabbled with doing an acoustic version of it. But the one thing that I am going to do, and you will hear about this soon, I can't say exactly where or how, because shush, it's secret for now. But I am going to be releasing a Pop Not Pop sound pack. Which will be quite extensive, and we'll have sections and samples directly pulled from the projects. So one of the things I have to do in January is start preparing that. And that will be available to the public to mess around with. So I hope to hear many songs and creations that have bits of Pop Not Pop kind of, woven into them.
Yeah, very cool. So you mentioned about like working with other people, and I know that's something you're doing more and more these days.
Yes.
I wondered, how has that influenced the album?
Ooh, another cracking question. It's influenced it more in its latter end. I think partly because of just the reality that I was trapped in a room during the pandemic. It was hard to do things remotely. Like, it wasn't impossible. And in fact, I think actually if the pandemic hadn't happened, I don't think I'd have gotten into it. Wouldn't have forced me to connect with people in the way that I have done. 2% Rising, which is the network that Katie Davini and I founded over Facebook just before the pandemic kicked in, really blossomed during the pandemic as a result of people being at home, being on the internet. And that did give me a wealth of people to connect with, which was remarkable and very important for my evolution and growth as a person, as well as a music maker. So it kind of really started to kind of kick in as I began to kind of complete the album from the perspective of I was also then looking around and being like, I should work with other people because I'm good at this. And so I started connecting with some artists through social media that I ended up going on to develop projects with. But also, you know, I got Katie involved in the mixing process. And it's quite funny because I'm not actually sure how delighted Katie is that I'm talking about that, because she's not a mix engineer. And she's like, no, I'm not. I'm a mastering engineer. So I'm not sure how useful it is for her for me to talk about this. But we went and did a chunk of the mixing in Weird Jungle Studio in Brighton. And she did that because she knew that I was getting, at the time, I wasn't in this glorious facility here in 1087. I was just in my room doing things on very shitty speakers. And she said, you need to hear this on good speakers, otherwise you can't mix it properly. It's a very obvious comment, but I needed someone to say it. So when we were able to leave our premises again, I went to Brighton and I had a lovely time. Basically, I went probably about 10 times altogether and just spent afternoons in Katie's studio, and we just worked through the songs. And the great bit is that Katie has the most remarkable quality control standard, and she will not let me release anything shit. And so she was really rigorous with her critique, and I am a little soft-bellied kitten, so I was like, criticism. And I don't take criticism well. I have to work on it incredibly hard. I have to remind myself that this is how you get better. I have to work on it. And so I kind of had to listen to Katie and make lots of notes, and I go away and then I change it. And during that time, I then moved into 1087, and that changed the whole game. Like, it elevated the record so much because I learned how to mix in a treated space through this record. And another reason I wanted to make this full-length record was to learn production techniques in a way that wasn't scary. Like, it wasn't someone else's work, and therefore it didn't feel so pressurized. It was just my work. So Katie got involved, and obviously then I'm working with Steve Kerrison to finish the mastering, because Katie did some analog work on it and then handed it over to Steve to finish in the box, in the door. And Steve did a beautiful job. So learning to pass things back and forth as a producer and not just as an artist between engineers and kind of mastering engineers was still a bit of a kind of newish process. I was still getting used to being like, okay, and then communicating in technical language with those people. And that set me up really well, actually, because that's what I now do a lot. And I end up encouraging a lot of artists to go on engineering courses as a result. I'm like, go and learn the language. It's really important. So that collaboration has really started to evolve. But it's nice because as time, it certainly got me thinking a lot about co-writing. Like, working with Annie remotely on Tiptoe was one of the fastest, most frictionless experiences I'd ever had, and I didn't know it could be that easy. And happily she enjoyed it as well. So we've actually done some more writing together since, which is brilliant. And it really got me thinking. And then off the back of that, I ended up kind of putting myself forward for a bit more things and asking for co-writing opportunities in different spaces, and I did some more remote kind of co-writing when I was in lockdown. But I did learn just how personality based it was. Like, if you're focusing on if you can't, I don't know how to use the words, I use the gestures. If you can't get into like a really good rhythm of communication and vision with someone within the first hour and a half, it's not happening. So that has been that was all these things kind of were little tipping points to further education and further growth and further development.
And it sounds like that development as a producer for other people has been going hand in hand as a producer for yourself as an artist as well, and they're kind of feeding each other and helping each other as you've kept developing.
It's all very symbiotic.
And so I guess the kind of final thing that I wanted to ask you was, moving forward from here, Rookes, moving beyond Pop Not Pop, where's the next chapter for Rookes?
Yeah. Well. So the Rookes kind of project as an artist is definitely evolving into production only. Like, I'm very conscious that is probably going to be where it lands. Like, it's where it was going to land eventually anyway. There was like a sense of career plan. I never say never, because that's dangerous. Like, if someone offered me an opportunity that was really amazing to continue to develop Rookes as an artist project, I'd probably take it, to be honest. But realistically, one of the things that I realized is that production is always, and writing and production is my favorite part of music making. Live performance has never quite done it for me. I can do it and I enjoy it, and I enjoy the connection with an audience, and that is really important to me. And because I feel like that's what music is for. It's for generating that connection. And I like people who are doing that differently. There are people like Amanda Palmer and Fred again, and people like that who are really exploring that sense of what does music mean to community. And I love that. But for me, I always just want to be in a cave making stuff. That is, I'm pale as the snow, like I'm an indoor being. And I like to be messing and making and experimenting, and I'm basically just a mad scientist with Andy Warhol's visage, and I love to make the things, and I just realized that I could do that all the time if I wanted. That could be my job, and I'm also someone who loves to facilitate. That is a habit that I can't kick. I love to create an environment, invite people into the environment to have a nice time and make things and connect and get vulnerable and laugh. And one of the things that has been a fairly consistent piece of feedback around the co-writing sessions or the production sessions that I facilitate is that we laugh a lot. We just laugh. Even if we're writing something really sad or depressing, my goal is for us all to be able to not feel bogged down by what we're doing, because there's so much of that in music industry. There's so many obstacles and barriers and fucking glass ceilings that we're still just kind of trying to smash through. The best gift that I can offer an artist who's hired me to do a job is to create a great space for them to make things, and for us all to just enjoy what we're doing and so for me to make music, it has to be a high quality, enjoyable experience. Otherwise I don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it. I'm too old to be like kind of trying to please everyone in the hopes that it's going to get me somewhere. And so I just want everyone to have a good time and make some cool stuff, and all being well and good, we all will make some money from it. So I think my priorities have changed a lot, and now that I realized that I can tap into my production superpowers, and they've accelerated so fast, I'm just sort of like, yep, here I am, this is great. So right now I'm working with some wonderful artists, and Rookes has become Rookes the producer. I launched Rookes Production Services in the pandemic, and so I've been hired to do production, additional production, mixing. I am primarily a producer. I can mix. I'm very good at mixing now thanks to Katie and her magical studio. So I can do these different jobs, and I do live engineering a little bit as well. So but primarily the fact that I'm able to just come in and be the thing that people need to make the great thing, because you want everyone's record to be great. That's been such a gift to get my head around. So I think, so release wise, Pop Not Pop is now in the world. It's there for people to discover and to be baffled by or really enjoy in equal measure, or by turns. And then in the new year we have some remixes coming.
Great.
We have 3. They're all amazing. They're all by incredible LGBTQ artists.
Amazing.
So so that will be coming out, and I'll be pushing that out. I'll probably be looking to do some DJ sets as well, because I started doing that recently, and putting to promote the remixes. And then it's a case of, this record is now a portfolio. It shows everyone what I can do.
I was going to say that, actually, Jenny, because I was thinking, you know, okay, so clearly you've made the decision, and I know that you may feel as well that kind of circumstances makes the decision for you as well, that really your focus is going to be on being a producer, and that will be producing mainly other people's projects, you know. But I was also going to ask, so therefore moving forward, what significance does it have for you having an artist project under your belt, though? You know, like, that I mean, how does it can you imagine how would it feel different if you still didn't have that under your belt as a producer?
I think it would be very difficult, actually. I think I almost can't imagine it. The concept feels very weird. But I think it would be very hard for me to be the producer that I am, and to be as good as I am, actually, if I hadn't have been an artist first. Because partly because artists come in and I will be able to identify and resonate and completely understand most of what they're going through, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Like, I've been in the industry for a decade. I have a breadth of experience. I've played to big crowds, small crowds, you know. It's such a very varied roller coaster experience. So being able to have that sense of empathy, it creates a very complex but a very rich and important dynamic. It allows you to engage very quickly on a very human level, with the person you're facilitating for, with the artist. And also because songwriting is such a vulnerable process, or music making is a vulnerable process, there's always going to be moments when people are going to feel a little bit vulnerable, in the sense of it's a bit scary or a bit sad. And to be able to kind of sit with that person and know what to do, and not feel like, oh, okay, what's going on? Do you want to go for a walk? You know, like, kind of not have that awkwardness around that journey, that inevitably happens in music making, is a real gift. So I think being an artist has completely shaped the kind of producer I am. And it also gives me a great deal of clarity about what I can offer this artist, in order to help them succeed to the best of my and their ability. So I often end up giving like a little crash course to the music industry for new artists as a part of the service that I offer. And I also offer a lot of transparency in terms of how the money works, and that is a very upfront conversation that's had right at the beginning of because yes, we're making things and it's fun and it's like fluffy, oh, lovely, airy fairy, let's make a thing, isn't it magic? But it's also a business deal. And there's no reason why those two things can't be held well in tandem. And you know, it also invites the artists to take themselves very seriously, because they are running their own business, and they're coming to me to be in business with them. And I am very good at and compassionate in the way that I spell that out for them, and I make that clear. And I'm like, okay, if you're interested in working with me, this is how it will work, and this is what you get, and this is how much you pay and how. So that sense of, these are things that I wish that I had seen and understood and been offered earlier in my career as an artist. So I've been able, through that process, to be able to draw in those services and attitude and ethics around the way that I kind of operate as a producer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. Well, I hope that was a good Q&A that, that we talked about everything you wanted to talk about. But congratulations, Jenny, on the album. It's awesome. My favorite track, by the way, is Paint.
Oh, yes.
Right now, at least. Yeah, that's my favorite track right now.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the remixes next year.
Oh, wicked. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you hosting today.
My pleasure.
But yeah, well, thank you. And I'm so glad you're enjoying the album, and I expect we'll connect soon.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Isobel.